Hello, Naka, and welcome to For the Record. Our guest tonight is the Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Madam Christine Beerli. This is the first time a senior executive of the ICRC has visited Fiji, and she's held a number of meetings during her time here. We, on For the Record, are grateful that she was able to make time to talk about some of the work that the ICRC does in Fiji, the region, and around the world. So, Ms. Beerli, welcome to our show. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here.
Your purpose for being in Fiji, as I mentioned, this is the first time that someone of your rank has come to Fiji. It's a very important visit for the country itself, but what was the reason behind deciding to visit?
We have our regional delegation here in Fiji with headquarters in Suva. It's covering 14 countries, including also New Zealand and Australia. And so I'm very happy to be able to be here and to look at our operations in the region. And I had also the possibility to be at the 100th anniversary of the Red Cross of New Zealand. So I was able to just make a combined visit here in this region.
Of course, during your time, you've met with a number of government officials, a number of stakeholders for Fiji, as well as representatives of the ICRC in Fiji, your office in Fiji. What are some of the discussions that have gone on?
I met and I will meet with the President, with the Foreign Minister, and of course with the President also of the Fiji Red Cross, which is extremely important to us. We discussed what the ICRC is doing in the region, in Fiji itself, and also how we can best collaborate and be good partners to the Fiji Red Cross.
When you talk about some of the issues for the region, what do you see as being of important discussion points for Fiji, for the region? Because I understand the ICRC works primarily or mainly with international human rights issues.
We work with international humanitarian law, which is the law applicable in situations of conflict or other situations of violence. But we also work in a lot of countries where we are invited to do so and help to build up, for instance, a good understanding of law and also international humanitarian law, but also human rights law in the work of police forces, of armed forces. We visit a lot of detention places, prisons, and in some countries of the regions, and here I'm speaking of PNG, we are also very operational in helping the population in the situations of this internal conflict they have got in the highlands of PNG.
Would it be accurate of me to say that the ICRC works primarily in areas of conflict?
This would be very accurate. We have really, our mandate is to be the organization helping in situations of conflict and other situations of violence. But of course we have also presences in countries where there is no conflict, because it's a diplomatic presence and it is a presence also on invitation of the government to help build up the knowledge in law-related matters, as I said before, and to train police forces and also armed forces.
And how does that tie into the ICRC's work and presence in Fiji?
In Fiji, we visit prisons and we make training for police forces and armed forces. And I think we have a very good collaboration also with the authorities of Fiji, and we can really bring an added value in this matter. And I think also that all of us as well, the authorities as ourselves, we would like to continue with this cooperation and think that it is of the benefit also for the population of Fiji.
You made an interesting point about working with the police, armed forces, and also visiting prisons, detention centers. In previous years, Fiji had a major issue with our corrections facilities. They were subpar so far as basic human rights were concerned. Was the ICRC involved at that time, and was there something going on behind the scenes, because it came to a stage where the judiciary had to step in and steps were taken? Things are better now, but Can you take us back a few years as to what the ICRC had to say about the state of our prisons?
We are in Fiji since quite a while. We are working in this domain since quite a while. But one of the specificities of the work of the ICRC in this domain, visiting prisons and working together with police forces and armed forces, is also that we work based on the principle of confidentiality. In all the countries around the world, this is not the specificity of Fiji. We go and visit, we see things, and we discuss them with the prison authorities and also with the authorities of the country. And then we come back and we look if things got better or not better. And it's just really a very confidential relationship. And we think that this is really a good thing to do so. And it helps us to go step by step forward all around the world in this kind of work.
Why? I mean, of course, I understand the ICRC has its reasons. You said it helps you move forward, but why the need for confidentiality when you're dealing with issues of humanitarian law and basic human rights?
It's not that it has to help us forward. It helps forward to develop the conditions in the prisons, because we working on the principle of confidentiality, this gives us the access. If we would go into a prison and then directly outside to the media and just tell everybody what we have seen, nowhere in the world we would get access to prisons. So we get access to the prisons because we work confidential, and afterwards we discuss what we have seen with the responsible authorities, and we come back and discuss it again and look what we have seen, if there is a progress. And like this, we get the authorities to really do it better and to progress in their work.
And with that, we've come to the end of this segment, Madam Beerli. Stay with us. We'll be right back talking with the Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Christine Beerli, who is in studio with us tonight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are continuing discussions with the Vice President of the International Committee for the Red Cross, Christine Beerli, who is on a visit to Fiji. Ms. Beerli, you spoke about the ICRC also working with police and the armed forces. Now, Fiji has a large contingent on peacekeeping duties in some of the most conflicted countries in the world. We serve in places where other countries usually shy away from. Now, how does the ICRC get involved in terms of training on humanitarian law? What would you tell a contingent which maybe is flying off to the Middle East in terms of the work that they are doing there? What can they do and what can't they do? And how heavily involved is the ICRC?
As we said before, in those situations where these soldiers will be afterwards, we have the applicability of the international human law. I mean, we have the applicability of the law of war. And beside of this, we also have the human rights law. You have these both bodies of law applicable. And when we make trainings, we speak to these people of both bodies of law, and we prepare them to the task they will have in these countries. And I think that this is a very good preparation for their duties and their tasks afterwards in these countries.
In general, say for a peacekeeper who's going through this training, what are some of the general do's and don'ts that they have to be taught about or briefed on, which they may not necessarily have been aware of?
I mean, that they have to spare civilians, that they have to respect the dignity of people. I mean, there are very basic rules that they have to learn. And it's also something we do all over the world. It's not something which is specific for Fiji, but we are very happy that we can do these courses here. And what is also one of the specificities is that the trainers are people who worked in the same domain. The people we bring here to train these armed forces are people who have an experience in such situations, who have also worked in armed forces, and also have lived through situations of conflict and war.
What is the ICRC's feedback on the way that Fijian troops serve as peacekeepers?
I don't have a feedback just here now. I think we never heard something negative, but I do not monitor the performances of the Fiji peacekeeper. But we are extremely happy that we have countries like Fiji bringing peacekeepers to this very difficult situations. It's a lot of courage. It's also a big commitment to the humanitarian cause, and I think we can only be thankful to a country which provides peacekeepers.
Looking at the Pacific in general, you talked about the work that is going on in PNG. You yourself have visited Fiji, but on a general regional scale, what do you think is the level of the acceptance of human rights laws and application of these laws in the region? Where were we, say, 20 years ago, and where are we today?
I think that there is a net progress, but there is still, as everywhere in the world, you have to continue to make trainings, you have to speak of these things, you have to also fight for the acceptance. And if I look a little bit further and look around the whole world, I think if the international human law would be accepted better, the international humanitarian law, the law of war, as I said before, would be accepted better, then we would have much less suffering around the world. If you look at the theaters like Syria, like Iraq, perhaps we can come back later on, there the disrespect of international humanitarian law is one of the big causes of suffering of a lot of civilian population.
But I mean, the Pacific itself wouldn't be one of the hotspots.
No, we are very happy. I mean, the Pacific in itself is quite a calm region. We are very happy about this, and I think one of the big challenges here is more natural disasters and all the climate change topic.
We've been talking primarily about human rights. Now, our viewers would be a bit curious about the ICRC and the work that the actual Red Cross office in Fiji does. Every time there's a natural disaster, they're out there, they're helping people. But our discussions have been more of human rights. So there's a bit of a disparity between Red Cross Fiji and ICRC, the head office.
It's no disparity, it's a lot of friendship and cooperation. But if I may, I could quickly try to elaborate on the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and how this goes together. Almost every country in the world, 190 countries, has got a Red Cross or a Red Crescent society in its country, working in the country with ambulance services, or with also sometimes hospitals, or then afterwards very strongly focused on natural disasters. And these national societies have got an umbrella organization which is called the Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, again with a focus also on natural disasters. And beside of this, we have the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, for which I'm working. And this institution is working in situations of conflict or other situations of violence, and is also the guardian of the international humanitarian law, the law of war I just mentioned before. But of course we all work together. When there is a big natural disaster, then we help the national society and their federation, but they have the lead. When there is a situation of war or conflict, they help us. They are our primary partners afterwards in these situations too, but we as ICRC are then in the lead.
And so the Red Cross and Red Crescent and the ICRC are more like partner agencies rather than one entity.
It's like a big family, but with different bodies in it.
Well, that explains quite a bit. So the work that is going on in Fiji, where the ICRC is concerned, may not necessarily involve the same people from the Red Cross Society at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a straight and good contact, but we are separated. We have our office and our regional headquarters in Suva, and the Fiji Red Cross, of course, too. But we do not specifically work on the same topics.
Okay, and with that, we've come to the end of another segment. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll speak with Ms. Beerli about some of the emerging conflicts around the world. We'll be right back. Good evening and welcome back to the show. We are speaking with the Vice President of the International Committee for the Red Cross, Ms. Christine Beerli, who is in studio with us tonight. Ma'am, as I indicated earlier, I'd like to talk about what the ICRC is doing about the refugee crisis in Europe, well, more so in Syria, and flowing on into Europe. We hear about European countries closing off their borders to thousands of immigrants. There are people dying in the oceans. They're drowning because there is very little rescue effort, or they're trying very extreme methods to try and get across and to get into Europe from Syria. Where do you see the solution in this?
I would begin with the cause of it. I mean, we have a terrible war in Syria. We have a war which spread out and is now a regional war also going through Iraq. And we have in Syria a population of 20 million people. 8 million people of these 20 million are internally displaced. They had to flee their homes, sometimes several times, because fighting came very, very near. 4 million had to leave their country. They are in the countries around. They are in Turkey, they are in Lebanon and in Jordan. And if you take a little country like Lebanon, with itself 4 million inhabitants, they have got more than 1 million Syrians living in their country. And I think we all have to have a lot of respect of that country, which is in a very volatile political situation. We know it all, and has now to live with 1 million Syrian refugees. Now, all these people who have left Syria, they just obviously have lost their hope that they can go back in their homes very soon. And that's why this really big movement through the Balkans in direction of Europe has begun. And we have this influx of refugees now in Europe. And I think this is a very, very difficult problem. And it's also a tragedy for all these people on the move. And it will probably not end before we will have found in a way or another a solution and peace in the region.
Well, maybe hard to come by given the situation that exists on the ground as we speak. Is the ICRC present in this region?
We are very present. We are very present. Syria is our biggest operation worldwide. It was last year the biggest, it will be next year, and it is this year the biggest operation. We are working together with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. As I told you before, this is a collaboration again with the National Society. And we are bringing a lot of help for water and sanitation. I may say that together with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, we bring fresh drinking water to almost 80% of the Syrians. We are very active in food and non-food help. We bring food parcels. We bring also other essential things we have to bring in for people. And we help also in the domain of health, with drugs, with medical devices, etc. In Syria, we cannot help with doctors and with nurses as we do elsewhere, but we cannot bring them in. So Syria is one of our biggest operations, and what I wanted to say also is that we work on both sides of the lines. We go cross-line, which is extremely difficult because what we have to have so that we are able to have access to the people most in need is a contact with each and every party in the conflict. This is on one side the government of Syria, but it is also a multitude of non-state armed groups being the opposition. This is not only one opposition, it's about 100 of different groups with which we have to be in contact so that we can organize our help convoys from point A to point B.
That's happening in Syria as we
Yes.
speak, but there are at the same time millions crossing over into Europe. And from the reports that come out of Europe, it seems that these people, these families, men, women, children, the elderly, are being turned away, and very few are able to make it across and being facilitated in a humanitarian way. What is the ICRC doing about this, and what is your opinion of the reaction of some of these countries which have decided to close off their borders?
I think it's not really, it's a little bit too easy to say they are turned away. If you look at Germany, for instance, Germany has taken this year 800,000 people coming from Syria and from Afghanistan and from the region, and also countries have taken a lot too. But of course it is a difficult situation when you have such a lot of people entering these countries. I think a lot of help is necessary, and there in the whole migratory route up the Balkans, you have got again in each and every country a national Red Cross or Red Crescent society, and these are mainly responsible also to help these people who are on their move. And we as ICRC, we help them whenever we can. We do a lot of restoring family links, because you have got a lot of people who lost the contact with their loved ones at home. Often you have young people on the move without their parents. They don't have contact back again to their families. And this is one of the big specialities of the International Committee of the Red Cross, to restore these family links with the ones which are at home. And this is also again a different way of fulfilling our task, the national societies in the different countries, and we helping with our specialties.
Are you also involved in maybe lobbying to some of the governments, not all of the governments in Europe, but some who are not letting these refugees come through? Because when you talk about human rights, of course, the governments have some culpability as well.
We are very clear. I mean, political decisions are always in the responsibility of governments. What we do not do is take ourselves political decisions or make political lobbying. I think this is one of the very strong rules of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, that we are not political. We are neutral, independent, impartial, and we do only humanitarian work. We do not political work. These are our principles, and these principles also give us the access to the most in need.
Okay, and that's the end of our third segment. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Bulabinaka, and welcome back to For the Record. Our guest once again, Christine Beerli, the Vice President of the International Committee for the Red Cross. Ms. Beerli, from what you tell me, the ICRC actively seeks out countries in need. And right now, the most critical area of the world is the Middle East and parts of Africa, but Middle East more so. So apart from Syria, where else are you engaged, and in what capacity?
Oh, we are engaged in 90 countries around the world. In every and each country where there is a conflict or another situation of violence, but I will not speak to you of all these countries. I mean, one of the very, very important countries is Afghanistan too. We are in Afghanistan since more than 40 years. We have been there under Russian occupation, afterwards when the Mujahideen had their fights under the international forces, and now again. And we see, and it's very unfortunate that the violence is scaling up and not scaling down, so we think that we have to stay there for quite a while. It's a big operation too. It's a very comprehensive operation. And you mentioned also Africa. There we have got our second biggest operation after Syria, which is South Sudan. South Sudan is also very dramatical, and we are at the edge of a famine because the farmers have no more the possibility to work their land because of the conflict. So it's a dire situation in Africa, in Afghanistan, and in the Middle East.
The ICRC has a lot on its hands, 90 countries where you're currently operating. But if I may, focus more so on the Middle East situation, Afghanistan, Syria, and nearby countries. Many of these countries, including Iraq, are places where we have Fijian peacekeepers currently on peacekeeping duties in operation. So it's sort of come a full circle. We talked about how the ICRC was involved in training these men and women to serve in these countries, and now we're hearing about the situation on the ground within these countries. So it sort of serves the ICRC's purpose to conduct this training before they are deployed, and then when they are working in these conflict areas. How does that form a support basis for the ICRC, if it does?
I mean, for us, it's extremely important that all the weapon bearers, all the peacekeepers, but also, of course, afterwards, the armed forces implicated in the fighting, that they know the international humanitarian law, that they know the rules of war. Because this was, as a matter of fact, the invention of Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, that he said also in the baddest situations of war, we must have some basic rules respected by everyone. And that's what we try to do. We try to work for the respect of these basic rules in law. And if we have the respect of these rules, then the civilian population is in a much better situation.
Let's come back to our part of the world, the Pacific. What do you see, what does the ICRC see as some emerging human rights issues which we may need to prepare for in the future?
It's difficult to say. I think what is very important is that we try to train, that we try to speak of human rights, of humanitarian law, that we try also to tell people that it is extremely important to respect all these kinds of law, that the rule of law in general is important and helps also to stay in a peaceful society. And in doing so, I think we are really working for a better and for a good future for everyone.
In the training that is conducted, do you often find that those who go through the training weren't aware of these basics, or that they knew about it, they just didn't know how to apply it?
I think everybody has in his back head some notions of human rights, of humanitarian law. But very often these people are very thankful afterwards if they get the rules black and white and explained also how they are applicable and how in practice this works out, and I think this can help much further.
When we talk about the Fiji Police Force, they are the primary discipline forces responsible for security within the country. Does it take on a different, does it become a different beast when you're talking about respecting the sovereign laws of a state, being the security agency, and also respecting human rights? We've had incidents in the past where police men have allegedly been involved in incidents of violence.
I think it's a steady work. You always have to continue to speak with people. You have to be in contact also with their superiors. And if the superiors are respectful of the law, then this is also very positive for every policeman, every weapon bearer. And up to now, we had a very open ear at the Fiji police forces. I mean, we have a good contact, we exchange. They are also very open to our training with the police forces. And I think and I hope that this will continue also in the future, because it is of a use and it is very beneficial for the Fiji population.
Is it always violence when you talk about breach of human rights?
It is. It can be, yes, of course. If somebody all over the world is not respecting the human rights or the international humanitarian law, then it's always at the detriment of somebody. Somebody has to suffer.
It may not necessarily be physical violence, however. Suppression and oppression don't have to necessarily come at the hands of weapons or knives and machetes.
Yes, these are the fine differences, but then perhaps you stay in the framework of the human rights or the humanitarian law, but you can be very usable in another way.
And with that, we've come to the end of another segment. Time is fleeting by, but we'll be back after this break. Welcome back to the show. We're just about to wrap up for this evening, but we still have a few minutes to go and we will continue discussions. Our guest once again is Christine Beerli, the Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Ms. Beerli, next month the 32nd International Conference is underway in Geneva, talking about sexual and gender-based violence. Now it's interesting for Fiji because the chair of this conference is our very own representative in Geneva, Madam Nazat Shamim. For us, it's a big deal for a small country to be holding or hosting and chairing such an important meeting. But for the ICRC, what are some of the issues that we should be taking with us to this 32nd convention, talking about gender violence?
We are very happy to have Ambassador Nazat Shamim chairing the Commission on Sexual Violence and Gender-Based Violence. This is one of the important parts of the international conference. The international conference as a whole will be chaired by Fatima Gayani, which is a lady from Afghanistan. So you see we have a real very gender equality in this conference. We are very happy to have two strong women chairing important committees and also the conference in itself. The main topic will be to strengthen international humanitarian law. What we discussed before, we would really like to speak of a compliance mechanism to really implement international humanitarian law and strengthen respect for this law, because we think that this would help a lot of civilian population around the whole globe.
Do you expect Madam Nazat Shamim to bring a Pacific perspective to all of this? What are your reflections
I mean, it's
of
always
this?
the same thing. If you are chair of an important committee, then you have to look that the work is going well and that there is a good outcome. And normally, it's not the position where you can bring in a lot of your proper propositions. So what we think that she will do in a very, very good way, because she's a great chair of committees, she will for sure assure that we get an outcome of this committee. And this topic of sexual and gender-based violence is very important on the one side in conflict situations where you have a lot of sexual violence, making suffer a lot of girls and women, but also men and boys. It is a general phenomenon. And on the other side, it also happens in situations of natural disaster. So we would like to cover both of it, and we would really have an outcome that afterwards brings a better situation for the victims.
The convention itself, the conference, is attended by governments, signatories to the Geneva Convention, as well as the national Red Cross societies. Fiji Red Cross would be there, as would PNG Red Cross, where the ICRC is involved. So does that sort of provide an international platform for some of the issues that the ICRC is involved in?
It's a very important international platform. It's always the national society together with its government. And as a matter of fact, these international conferences are the ones who create new international humanitarian law. In 1863, the first international conference decided on the first Geneva Convention. And then in 1949, the 4 Geneva Conventions were decided, and later on the 2 additional protocols. So it's really something extremely important to have these conferences decide on new law on behalf, and really also to help the population in very difficult situations.
Ms. Beerli, last question. We've basically run out of time, but very quickly, as you leave, what do you hope to take with you, and what do you hope to leave behind? Very quickly.
I take with me a very good impression of a marvelous landscape and of a very nice region and very kind people. And I would leave behind that the respect of international humanitarian law is very important and that we should strengthen it.
Ma'am, thank you very much for being on our show, and best of luck on your visit.
Thank you.
And that was our show for this evening. Remember, if you have any comments or questions, you can email us for the record at fbc.com.fj. I'll be back next weekend, but up next is Nemani Delay Batiki with his segment. From me for tonight, good evening.